All righty. Good morning, Mr. Palmer. How are you, sir?
All
Happy
right,
April.
how you doing, John?
Oh, I'm ducky. I should say happy April, but I mean, I think we did record a couple weeks ago, so it's not the first time we're recording in April. But
Yeah, it's
anyways,
also it's also the middle of April,
it
so we're
is. It definitely feels like spring. I know. I laugh because I know we were talking about this last. I think it was Friday. You were having snow, and I was in shorts because it was like 90 degrees in New York. Um, but I can't complain. Kids went back to school today. Woke up with a water main break and brown water. It was fun. It was a good morning. Um,
wow.
yeah, nothing,
Yeah, we
nothing.
had we had 80s and then we had snow and then it was back to 80s. So this is the season for sickness because our bodies doesn't, we don't know. We're like, is it winter? I mean, I think I woke up yesterday morning and I looked at my monitoring station and it was like, yeah, it's 25 degrees outside. And I'm like, it was 80 degrees just a couple days ago. I'm like, come on.
Yeah, it's just not. It's not right, man. It's just not fun. But it
So
is. It's nice to be able to open the windows up again, and
yes.
um, so that's a plus. It's the light is at the end of the tunnel, I guess, maybe, and it's hopefully not another train coming head on. But um, it's yeah, it's sunscreen weather. Unfortunately, my son was out with a soccer game yesterday, and I was the smart dad who didn't bring any, and so he and I both have a little bit of sun for it, but it beats freezing at the field, so I'll take it, I
And it's been some years since I've done that, but I remember that. But
guess. But anyways, that has nothing to do with Wi-Fi or what we're talking about today.
yeah,
So
I want to talk about stuff not working.
everything doesn't work, right? Um,
Well, I mean, it works sometimes,
Maybe.
but there was a time where just recently you had a trip, and I have yet to actually talk to you about this trip. So I'm hoping that we can spend some time today.
Sure.
Listen to my dog going crazy because
It wouldn't be a Ruckus podcast without a dog barking.
stuff is broken. So my dog is angry that stuff is broken, but you had to take a trip because stuff is broken. I want to hear about this.
And stuff being broken, I think it's a relative term. It's the it depends if you want to call it that. Um, Sort of a level set of what defines is it broken. And in this particular trip that I took, it wasn't so much that it was. I don't want to say it was completely broken. Like it wasn't like an up down situation of like, okay, the circuits are down or the router's down or the controller's down. It was more of a it's not working as it's supposed to be or as we think it's supposed to be. Um, and of course, it went roundabout troubleshooting online and a lot without me being involved um, before I finally got involved. And, this is one of those, first and foremost, it's my own fault because, I was hearing some of the sessions and what they were doing. And I'm like, well, I feel like we're missing some basic information that should have been gathered between the phone calls and the tech visits and all that. And I didn't so much say I would go ASAP, but I said if I need to help out, I can certainly do that because I've done troubleshooting in a past life, as most of us have. And before I knew it, I was booking a flight to a far flung corner of the United States to do some troubleshooting. And it's interesting because as somebody who used to do this as a truly daily basis, and not that I don't do wireless as on a daily basis now, but as an SE, I'm doing a lot of different things.
Right.
In my past life, there was, I mean, depending on the day, I could be doing design, I could be doing planning, I could be doing troubleshooting, I could be doing all three within a matter of 3 hours. It definitely just depended on how the day was going. But I had all the tools, and I mean, like I had Ekahau, I had my NetScout, I had all my different tools across the platforms. I had Windows tools and Mac tools and clients and everything. More tools than I could shake a stick at. And I'm leaving quite a few out just because they're just, I mean, it's too many, and this isn't a tools episode aside from the fact that I'm on it. Um, but coming in as an SE, I don't have a lot of those tools anymore. And more importantly, the tools that I do have outside of a couple, I don't use on a regular basis anymore. So it was a good thing for me because I got to knock off some rust, but it was a little bit painful because there was a lot of rust. I used to say it all the time. These are perishable skills, and if you do not use them, you will lose them. And it was a bit of a rude awakening for me in that respect. Without
All
picking on
right.
a, go ahead,
No,
without picking on
so
a platform,
yeah,
it
not
was.
not picking on anything, but so let's kind of do a quick level set here
Hmm.
because you and I actually talked about this trip before you went. And in fact, I was confused because I thought you were going to troubleshoot one problem, and it turns out no, you were going to troubleshoot another problem. So, just a quick level set before we talk about, you go a little bit further into your story.
Sure.
What was the issue that caused you to get on a plane from the Northeast to West Texas, which
So,
I've been to West Texas, and it's not easy to get there from the Northeast.
it was. I think the report generally was that the clients weren't getting the speeds that they were expecting. Um, and you were
Which is a
confused because there were,
lovely problem.
yeah, there were a couple different places with a couple different issues, and they were getting a little bit conflated. And you and I weren't the only ones getting confused by it. Having been on some of those calls, there were definitely times where lines were crossed. This is one of those important things, but just as a total like separate takeaway. When you're doing troubleshooting, make sure you're only doing troubleshooting on one particular item at a time. And you're very clear with everybody involved. And you laugh and I laugh because we've both seen it happen where like you'll say one thing is okay and they'll think the thing that they're worried about is okay, and that's not what you were talking about. And this is also the importance of meeting minutes after the calls because it's then put into notes that everybody should have an email, and then you can say, look, on the April 1st call, I said that X was fixed, and on April 2nd, you told Bob that X wasn't fixed, and see, I've got it in my notes. But so that's why a little bit of things got confused because there were a couple of hot items that we were dealing with. But this was a site that in a lot of different properties, you don't necessarily just get Wi-Fi. Like, I mean, I have it at home. I pay Verizon for their plan, and I expect to get up to a gig. And of course, if you read the fine print, it says that the speed test up to about 940 or 980, whatever it is what they shoot for. And in this particular case, the clients were reporting, suboptimal speeds. And it wasn't completely clear what happened. It wasn't completely clear what changed. My concern, and I think some of the concern from other people, was we didn't know what was going on with the RF. And as we both know, and I mean, you used to work in an airport, big environment with lots of different, changing RF characteristics depending on who's where and when. My concern, or a concern was, and a complaint that we had heard was, are people standing up their own Wi-Fi routers, and is that screwing things up? Are we looking at a lot of interference? And of course, we had nothing. We had no visibility in terms of like what did the spectrum look like. Anybody that knows, anybody that's done Wi-Fi in a city knows, even the 5 gigahertz spectrum. This is why we need 6. If you get in a densely populated area and have poor channel plans or just a lot of neighbors with some really bad Wi-Fi, 5 gigahertz can become borderline unusable in certain situations. And so that was kind of my concern. I didn't know anything. I still don't. But I didn't know anything going into it to be able to really do some. I was going in blind, basically. And so the idea was get me on a plane, get me down there, kind of do what I can to figure out what was going on. And of course, right before I left, I was told, well, it seems like it's getting better or got better. But I was already booked, and I was like, I think it was like literally the call the afternoon before I flew, and everybody was like, yeah, you're going anyways just to make sure. I'm like, all right, fine. So, I went down, didn't have the usual NetScout. Love those tools. They're really great for what they do. I was hoping to go down with a Sidekick, didn't have one in time. So basically went in with some, I had Echo, but I didn't have any floor plans either, which makes surveying a little bit difficult. So basically went in and used primarily, I hate saying this, but I used speed test because that's what they were using. So I was using it to keep them honest and kind of be on the same page. But I was using a mixture of Adrian's Wi-Fi Signal and Wi-Fi Explorer Pro 3. So I was using Signal to make sure I could see which, I could track which AP MAC address I was on And
Right.
I think I have like SNR, MCS rate, and a couple other things highlighted in my toolbar. So I was taking a screenshot of what I was seeing when I was in each room, and then I was running Wi-Fi Explorer when I was there too, just to look at the spectrum. Not a exact science at all, unfortunately, but at least it gave me a glimpse into what I was seeing when I was standing where the client was standing or sitting, whatever. It's one of those cases where, in a perfect world, I would have had the full site, floor plans, a sidekick, and about a week to walk every room inch by inch and get an active survey done. Because I don't think there was one done for the place in question for maybe ever, to be honest. But it was one of those where, honestly, I had to check myself at the door, kind of. And that seems a little bit, and I don't know, counterintuitive is probably what I would say. I'm used to going into a place where, like, I own the Wi-Fi. I've got a team of 5 or 6 people. We own the Wi-Fi, and obviously I know it's unlicensed spectrum, so nobody owns it. But, like, it's our responsibility. Our standards are the standards that we have to adhere to. So I've got the tools, I've got the know-how, I've got the ability. If I have a problem with the Wi-Fi, I can go fix it. And I want it to be the best. Like, there's no SLA for that. I want it to be the best. And with this instance, it was, you've got a property, it's got a contract, it's got a certain SLA, it's got a hit, and speed test hitting, whatever the up downs were, that was it. And I'm like, this could be so much better than that. I think I didn't bother to find out what the actual backhaul was, but it was definitely something that they were limiting on, in the configuration, and walked around the building using the limited tools that I had, and made sure that they were getting the speeds that they were supposed to. Plugged in, confirmed on the wire as well, which ultimately, and it was a funny conversation at the end of the day, because I had some people on all sides going, "Why do you need to get access to a router, or a switch rather?" And I said, honestly, I want to wire in and verify that our wired speed test is the same or very close to what we're getting on wireless. Because if we're supposed to get, let's say 500 up and down on wireless, and I'm getting 500 up and down on wireless, but on the wired side I'm getting 750. Well, there's not that much loss there shouldn't be that much loss on the wire to where I'm losing a third of the throughput. And ultimately, when I explained my sort of goal, it was, I think we were getting within 10%. It was like I think I was getting like 510, 515 up on the wired, and it was like 490. Numbers are fudged because I'm not going to go back and look at my reports.
Right. Yeah.
It was close, and honestly, knowing that you're going to lose some with the overhead on the Wi-Fi, it wasn't a gap that made me go, "Wow, we're missing something." It was like, okay, we're hitting the acceptable limits, and part of what I was trying to prove too was, I ran one of my first comments when they started using speed tests. I'm skeptical. No offense to the people on the speed test, but it's not a troubleshooting tool. It's what everybody uses, but it's like, how fast are you getting to the internet? It's not necessarily Wi-Fi. If you run an internal speed test on an internal system, your Wi-Fi could be fine. It could be a complete issue on your backhaul. Not going down that rabbit hole yet unless we want to, but they were sort of getting a little bit defensive about my comment that I could run 10 speed tests from one client in the same location and get 10 different sets of numbers. And I ran I think I ran like 7 or 8 speed tests from the wire and got 7 or 8 different numbers, and said, like, at the end of the day, it's not even wireless at that point. It's just it's a product of speed test. Like, it's useful in that it gives you some numbers to look at, but you have to take it with that grain of salt.
Well, speed test is interesting. So I don't want to go too far down that rabbit hole, but let's just take a second here and talk about it, because speed test was something that I fought, and I don't want to say fought because it's not, but it was something that I had to educate my executives about, because they use speed test. They used it extensively, and it's fine because it is a tool that's there. But the most important thing to remember is that's the tool, either speed test or fast.com, that the end users are using. And so you have to understand what your end users are going to be looking at. And so that's why, even though we don't like using any of those tools because we understand all the other stuff, there's a problem, with that, with trying to use it as a troubleshooting tool. It is, I remember hearing a story from a guy who told me that his executive would go in and change the speed test server that they would bounce off of. And they were in California. He'd change it to talk to a server on the East Coast somewhere because he's like, well, I'm going to test everything. And we were like, well, yeah, you're testing, your internet connection from, California to, New Jersey or wherever. And it's like, but that doesn't, you're testing so much outside of your team's control that there's nothing you can do. But it is something to remember that, hey, our end users use these tools. So you have to use them because at the end of the day, if the end user is happy, if the final customer is happy, then our customers are happy, and then people stop calling us. So while there are some issues, because if you don't know, speed test servers, when you use those tools, you're actually testing the server at the remote end just as much as you're testing your infrastructure. So if the server at the remote end is really busy at that moment, then that's where your extra, problems come in, because you're testing from your phone through the infrastructure you control, through your routers, through your ISP, routing through wherever to try to get to a server. And then you got to test their ISP connection. And then you're testing the capabilities of their server on the other end. Now there's some requirements because I looked into building my own actually public speed test server. And there's some requirements you have to meet in order to get the different ratings on the service. But at the same time, you're still, if all of a sudden I have a big push on my ISP as the server, as the hosting the server, if I have it all of a sudden, if I get that overloaded, or if I get a bunch of speed tests coming in, or I got other things going on that server, then I can overload my server and everything could be cool on your end, but the test that you get could show some different things. And so that's kind of the thing with speed tests, but it's something that we need to do. And I think you did a good job. I think, we also have to understand, if you test on the wire and test on wireless, you're not necessarily testing for speed. You're testing to show the difference between the two. Right.
Yeah. And I was, with me for sure, it was, I wanted to see if there was a disparity. And basically, honestly, for me, it was a short trip. It was a challenging trip, and then you mentioned it was a harder to get to area. It wasn't like, I'm in New York City. It wasn't like I hop on a train, I'm there in a half an hour, no big deal. It was a production to get there. It was a busy time of the month for me. I had a lot of things going on, and it was one of those where we just needed to get there. It was going to be a quick in and out trip. Like I said, I would have liked to have like a week where I would be on site with the sidekick, all the floor plans in the world. And have the time, but it wasn't conducive to that. So it was like, all right, well, what can I get? And so one thing, I didn't mention this actually, but what I was doing is, while I'm sitting there doing, screen caps of Signal, taking the Wi-Fi Explorer scans, I was also running packet capture. I haven't done much with them. I eyeballed them really quickly to make sure there wasn't any sort of eye-popping, really hard to miss problems. But it was one of those things where I wanted to capture every bit of data that I thought I could while I was there, because it was a limited engagement, just so that I had something I could go back to after the fact, if I had any questions or thoughts that I might have missed. And so in each of the areas that I was testing, and I was, I think, 7 or 8, there's a good chunk of packet captures for each area. But the problem, with that is, and I think we talked about this, packet captures are going to capture the traffic that's there then and now, and things might have been behaving, but, whether I'm in an apartment complex or an office building or say, student housing, if I'm there, say it's called housing, right? If I'm there in the middle of the afternoon and no residents are there, or very few residents are there, the network might look awesome. But if the problems are popping up at like 11 o'clock when everybody's online streaming Halo and Netflix and Disney and all that stuff, and I'm not there doing a PCAP, doesn't really matter. Um, they're going to complain. I'm going to say it looked fine because I wasn't there when the problem popped up. Fortunately, this one actually did seem to get resolved. I think there was a configuration change or something that got reversed, and not 100% sure. But like I said, it actually was effectively remedied before I even showed up. I like to say, well, once my plane ticket got scheduled, they fixed it. But it was humbling for me because I think the whole point for me was, again, perishable skills. There was definite rust in terms of some of the software. I mentioned one of the survey tools at the beginning. I didn't have the Sidekick, which was kind of a bummer because that's, I think, for all the comments that we've seen online, it's still a good tool. But the problem for me with that is, since I last used that on a very regular basis, the interface has changed significantly. And I don't want to call it a steep learning curve to get back and familiar with this, and hopefully this doesn't get some folks from there calling me for training. I already get those spam emails. I don't want any more of them. But it's one of those, it reminded me that in my old life, I was in Echo every day. Like literally I had a second machine on my desktop, or actually a desktop that I was doing like predictives on, and any sort of design work would primarily live on my desktop, so that I had a machine just for Echo, but it was open all the time. Like I would log in and my morning was making sure it was up. Okay, what am I working on? Where did I stop? And I was using it, and I was updating it on a regular basis, and I was very, very familiar with it. And yeah, okay, fine. New software. They changed things a little bit. There's a learning curve, but it's changed so much. And the first time I opened it up to use it again, it's probably been 6 or 8 months. And I had what I needed, in terms of like, I was figured it out enough to be dangerous. But the problem again, and this is the bane of any wireless pro's existence, no floor plans. You can't do a survey if you've got no active floor plans, or not, sorry, not active, but accurate floor plans.
Right.
And I had some information, but not enough to do like, let's put it this way. It was I want to say it was, call it 100 units of the same layout, but I didn't have the floor plan with all 100 units on it. I had like the model floor plan. And then if I wanted to do like if I want to do all 100, would have to have stitched them all together, or created 100 individual files. And the problem, obviously, as you and I both know, with Ekahau, you need everything together, because if I do one for each, room, call it, like, and I have 100 individual files, I'm not seeing what the interference is, or what the bleed through the walls is to the other. I need everything on one map.
This is a common problem that we see in Wi-Fi in general a lot. Is, and I used to, when I was doing event Wi-Fi, I used to run into this problem all the time when they'd be like, they pull out an AP out of a room, and they're like, well, we're not using that room anymore. And I'm like, that's great, but we're using the room right next to it. And the AP that was in the room that you pulled, because we're not using that room anymore, was actually providing coverage to the rooms on either side of it. And so that's where, if you're listening and you're end user, or you're a customer, or you run one of these, MDU sites, please give us the floor plans of the entire thing, because it goes up, down, it goes left, right. And so, floor plans are a big thing. But I want to tell a story about something that I learned a long, long time ago before I got in Wi-Fi. And it goes back to some of the issues that you were running into. I was taking a class on a public safety radio transmitter. It's called a Master 3, and it's a big, big radio. It does 100 watts out. You can do more, but the ones we were training on was 100 watts. And we asked a question. Somebody asked a question in the class, and it was like, because you're supposed to go tune these things and make sure. And we were like, well, how often are you supposed to tune them? And the instructors told us, he said, here's the thing. He goes, these things are so stable, and these things were rock solid pieces of radio equipment. And he goes, they probably only need to be tuned like once every 5 or 6 years. He goes, they're really, really stable, really, really solid. He goes, the things are massively over-engineered. He goes, but you need to do it once a year. And somebody was like, wait a second, you're telling me, it can go 5 or 6 years. And now you're telling, and then you tell me I need to do it once a year. It's like, why? And the guy said, and I always remember this. He said, you do it not because the equipment needs it, but because you need it. He goes, you need the practice. You need to remember how to go through and tune the thing, how to use the tools, because he's like, if you only break this thing out and you only go do it when it breaks, he goes, it's going to be so long since you've done it last. He goes, you won't remember how to do it. And so, it's one of those things that I know you and I both struggle with, is this idea that there's things that we used to do in our previous, jobs where we would, we were constantly in it. We were constantly doing it. And now we find ourselves where we're not constantly in it. Well, I'm not in a controller every single day. I'm not in Ekahau or Homina or, IB Wave or Air Magnet. I'm not in these things every single day the way I used to be. And so, it's one of those things where, you and I were working on something, and the idea was building a home lab. And so that's where, if you really care about it, in order to do troubleshooting, you got to know how to do troubleshooting. And part of doing that is having a home lab. And we'd love to say that we get into our labs every day and troubleshoot, but you and I both know that's not how that works.
No, it's easier said than done. And in fairness, I mean, I think it's partly because of what we do now, because we're definitely not doing the same types of roles we were doing in our previous employers' labs. But I think the other component, and I think it's improving now, because I think everybody's kind of getting back to work in the office, or if that's what they wanted to do. But there was a chunk of time there where that little pesky global pandemic was popping up, and most of us weren't allowed to go into the office much, if at all. And while I was still at my old employer, because I did switch jobs during the pandemic, for a time, we were still doing designs for some sites, but everything was kind of, on simmer. There wasn't anything going crazy, because everybody was like, what's going on? We don't know how long it's going to be. We don't know when we can deploy this. Predictives were fine. Looking at surveys was fine, because I was still doing work with that. But there were points in my day where I would literally plug the Sidekick into the iPad or my phone, and I would survey my house, because I just, what else am I going to do, right? There was nothing else I could survey, and okay, fine. There's only so many times you can survey a couple thousand square feet of home, but that was it. If you're not leaving the house, if you don't have any place to go to do that, I imagine that as people got it back into the office for surveys post-COVID, it was a little bit, it was probably a little bit of a process to do it, just because, it was mothballed. But yeah,
that brings up a good point that I was talking to, I don't remember who I was talking to at one of the conferences, and I was talking about the fact that for a couple of years there, all of the information that Wi-Fi professionals used to get all the time, every day, everything was put on hold. How does, and my big point was, 11AX came in to, existence, and OFDMA, and everybody was like, OFDMA, and OFDMA was designed to solve a problem in Wi-Fi. And it was a high density, high efficiency solution. That's what 802.11ax is, HE, high efficiency. But the problem is as soon as we got enough clients and enough APs deployed to, actually make OFDMA functional, we all said we're going to work from home for the next 2 years. And so we lost the ability to troubleshoot and to see these networks in their natural environment, if you will. And we spent 2 years doing it in our house, and everybody was like, oh, and it didn't really work. Well, because it's not designed for your house. It's designed for high density environments, lots of hundreds of phones talking very small packets all at the same time. OFDMA, I think, still works. But when we all went home for 2 years, we lost that. we lost that, and so all of a sudden it's like, okay, well, it doesn't really work on my house. Well, it's never designed to work in your house. And so I feel like, we've lost a couple of years of experience as Wi-Fi professionals in whole, of how these networks really work. Now, some people did get to go out. I knew of some work that some of our professional services guys were doing during the pandemic that was, like, wow, you still get to go do that stuff. And they're like, yeah, they're like, but it's really crazy and odd. And so there's this very, there's a couple of people that have been able to keep up with that, but I feel like there's this 2-year gap that we're still trying to catch up from, where we didn't have all the hands-on stuff. We didn't have people in offices. We didn't have all these troubleshooting and all this work that we had to do, that we had been doing. Like you pointed out, it all just stopped. You were still planning stuff, but that real world, real network, get into the middle of it type of thing, it all stopped. And I think we're still trying to recover from that. And it's okay. I'll tell everybody that's listening, it's okay that we have that 2-year gap, because most everybody has that 2-year gap. So don't feel bad, but yeah, I think your trip to West Texas is kind of a reminder to us all that, hey, don't let your troubleshooting skills lapse just because you don't have that ability. Maybe we need to start surveying our houses again or stuff like that if you're still working from home. But it is something that, hey, dust off the tools you have, or else you're going to lose them.
Yeah, I agree. And I mean, I think my other takeaway from that, two parts really, is I always struggle with the analogy that, like, when the only tool you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail.
Right.
I actually got it. But that was kind of what it was. Like, you didn't have, I didn't have all the tools that I normally would have liked to have had in my toolkit. So you make do with what you can.
Yes.
And, you identify some things that maybe it would be nice to have in the future, or if you've got people going on site, you make sure that at a minimum you can get like X, Y, and Z, like the PCAPs.
Right.
Everybody, whether you've got a Windows machine or a Mac, should be able to get PCAPs. Wireshark is generally free. But you grab everything you can, and maybe it's not everything, but it's more, because you don't necessarily always have the ability to just walk over and go back to that site. And then the ultimate point for me was I had to get myself out of the mode of, I want this to be the best possible, to I want it to be as good as the customer's expecting and or what is contractually obligated to be. And there's definitely, like, yeah, I could put people in those sites and they go, this could be so much better. Sure. Is it what they want it to be, though? Because it's one of those things where, again, if you're, and I know certain people like to joke about things like captive portals and monetizing Wi-Fi, but the reality is there are, it's a market, right? There's definitely, and you get into the higher end housing and, whether it's hotels, apartments, things like that, you can pay for Wi-Fi. Anybody goes to a hotel, you're paying $5 for premium Wi-Fi, or you get 10, 20 meg up and down for free. Monetized Wi-Fi. It's what they do. Some people pay, some people don't. Some people, like me, just turn on their hotspots. But it's unless you're going in there with the directive from that engagement being, go make this the best it can be, then make sure one of your rules of engagement is, what is the expectation of the performance? Am I supposed to see gig up and down? Am I supposed to see 100 up and down? Am I supposed to see whatever? And the reality of it too, and this is something Chris Avant's taught me, and I've probably heard it from more than a few people, but he reminded me of it several classes. Everybody's worried about gig up and down, 2 gig up and down now, or whatever. Everybody wants Google Fiber and stuff like that. The reality is, if you can guarantee a fairly stable connection to a particular client device where it's 100 up, 100 down, there's not much they can't do reliably well. I mean, you don't need much more than that to do streaming or things like that, or phone calls over the web. It's the stability and the reliability of that 100 meg up and down connection that's the key. They don't need bursting to 900 meg. They just need stability, and that's kind of, I cringed when I saw some of the speeds I was seeing. I was like, oh, this is painful, but I'm like, I don't, I was working and I didn't notice any problems because most of what I was doing when I was there, I didn't need more than speed. So, yeah, it was definitely an eye-opener. It was good to get back out in the field. I will say this about that, aside from the nightmare travel I had, because there was some bad weather. it was good to get back out in the field. Definitely good to get back out in the field.
Good. Well, I think we should probably put some links to all the tools we've talked about in this episode, because that is something that, I did a webinar a few years ago, and we were talking about some of the different tools that we use. And there was a lot of people that don't know about, tools like Wi-Fi Signal or Wi-Fi Explorer Pro, or they don't know how to capture, over the air stuff. And I know our buddy Eddie Ferrero did some videos about that I point people to all the time and be like, hey, this is, you don't know how to capture over the air stuff. Here, go watch these videos from Eddie, and he'll show you how to do it on a Windows and on a Mac. And so I think we should put some notes down there for some people. But I think your one point about, you didn't have every tool that you wanted, but you still had enough tools that you could do some of that work to try to figure out, okay, what's happening, what can I see? And yes, you capture the data while you're there, because it's better to have it and not need it than go, oh wait, I didn't capture that over the air stuff while I was, half the country away, and took me a day to get there and a day and a half to get home, and I didn't bother to capture stuff. So you get everything you can while you're there, and then if you don't need it, you delete it.
Yeah, and
storage is cheap.
and the other thing with the tools, and we can kind of put this on the Google sheet for a future episode, but one of the takeaways from that, as we were talking internally, was starting to look at what we can leave on site that can function as a client for us, that will be our canary in the coal mine, so to speak. And there are plenty of options out there. We've both used them. We've talked about plenty more. Some of them are commoditized, some of them are open source. We're close to it. But things like that, especially when you're talking about these really hard to get places, or whatever you want to call them. I mean, at the end of the day, the reality is we're all working in smaller teams, and we're covering a lot of ground. So anything, to borrow a term from the military, anything we can use as a force multiplier, it's a big, big win. And so that's something we can talk about.
We should do an episode on some of the tools and the different things. So yeah, we'll put that on the calendar, and hopefully it won't get pushed back too far. So
well, it's a good one we can do whenever, because it's less dependencies.
All right.
Well, cool beans.
Well, good talking with you, John.
Always. Let me go find the soundboard that's buried on my laptop. There we go. And it's my way of hitting the outro, and we'll catch you guys on the next episode.
All right.
And stop. Done. Cool.